Well, Eric, brother, it's great to see you again. It's been a while, and I love what you write, and it's good to actually talk live. And Steve, I've been looking forward to this for some time, and would love to have. I'm not going to assume that everybody watching or listening to this knows who you are and what you've contributed and what you're passionate about. So if you could take a few minutes and actually take your time. I mean, there's no rush, but just share yeah, sort of what you're known for or what you're good at, what you do that you're proud of, and then what you're particularly passionate about or concerned about these days. And we're recording this just after the summer solstice in 2023.
Well, thank you, Michael, and thanks for Eric for organizing this. Who am I? Um, I mean, I'm well known to my family, um, but I find it interesting when you told me earlier that I'm well known and well respected amongst a number of people. It's a little bit surprising because I consider myself just some guy trying to figure out what the hell is going on in this world. And I've been on that journey for perhaps 10 years now, a little bit, probably a little bit more. Um, I fell down the rabbit's hole. Go back a bit. Who am I as well? Canadian. I live just north of Toronto. I am a retired educator with two beautiful daughters and a lovely wife. We live what was once a relatively rural area. Some might consider it suburban on the edge of Toronto. It is quickly becoming absorbed in Toronto, which is something I've been trying to fight against. But it's a losing battle, is as most of what we kind of rally against for those in the growth, degrowth kind of mindset. Um, Pop in anytime if there's something else you want me to say. My background is primarily, well, let me put it this way. I spent the entire decade of the 1980s in university chasing 4 degrees. I really just kind of flitted from one area to another. I started off in biology, physiology when I thought I might like to go into medicine. Really didn't have the shall I say, discipline for my academic studies all the time at that early age. Um, and in one of my, well, then I got interested in psychology. So I did a degree in biology, physiology, got interested in psychology, went into psychology for a few years. Then I was interested in human evolution because of a book we had to read in one of our psychology classes. I had to read Stephen Jay Gould's Ever Since Darwin.
Yes.
And it absolutely caught my passion for human evolution. I ended up going into anthropology, archaeology, and I did my master's in archaeology. I spent a few years in that. Um, that was very interesting. I worked on some native reserves in Ontario. I spent a summer down in Mexico working on a site, but there weren't a lot of career opportunities in the late 80s for archaeology. And so I ended up in education, which my wife of, I think we're coming up on 37 years, she always wanted to be a teacher and go into education, lots of career opportunities, especially for a male teacher in elementary schools. So I ended up 25 years in education, 10 years as a classroom teacher, mostly grades 6, 7, and 8, and then the last 15 years as an administrator. But right near the end of that, one of our family traditions when our girls were young, we carried this through for quite a number of years, was going to our local Blockbuster, so you can tell when that was, and renting videos to watch as a family. And on one of these, as the girls were older and everybody's choosing their own different movies, we might find one or two that everyone would agree on and watch together. But we often also, everybody chose one just that they might be interested in. I came across a documentary called Collapse with the late Michael Rupert. And that started me down the rabbit hole of peak oil. And it got me back into my graduate work of archaeology as I started exploring everything that Michael was talking about. And my view of things changed overnight. Absolutely just shifted 180 degrees or more as to how I viewed the world. I'd been exposed to the collapse of civilization in archaeology, but it wasn't something I was particularly interested in, passionate about at that time. So that's taken me to where I am now. I do a lot of writing, as I said to you earlier. I'm not a big video, podcast, audio learner. Mine more is in writing and reading. As I tried to struggle with what I was coming to understand, I thought, I've always wanted to be a writer. It's something I've enjoyed. I used when I was teaching, and I penned a novel on societal collapse, and I got some, accolades from family and friends, which is really what was intended to do, was share my understanding. And as I became more comfortable in understanding at least my interpretation of what was going on in the world, I started writing in a nonfiction way. And I do that under what I call today's contemplation, collapse cometh. And it was really meant to just, as the fictional work is more of a cathartic journey for me to get my thoughts and feelings out, whether anyone read it or not. It served the purpose of allowing me to work through my understanding and get it out there and out of my system so that I could move to what I would call acceptance, and what I equate with the post-doom philosophy. I'm not sure I completely understand anything, but I'm trying to.
Yeah, that's great, Steve. Yeah, I encountered you, I think about a year and a half, 2 years ago, and I think I've only read maybe 4 or 5 things that you've written and posted, but I found myself aligning with you, like, holy shit, yeah, this is somebody who I count as a colleague, a shared heart mind in this domain. And so before I go into a little more depth in terms of asking questions about what you're passionate about now and what you're most concerned about now, I wanted to also ask you, Erik, for people, anybody watching or listening to this that don't know who you are, just give us a sense of what you're particularly interested in or passionate about or known for.
Okay. Well, I'm Erik Michaels, and I'm the owner of Mega Sound, which is a full service, I should say was a full service professional, MC and officiant company. I officiated wedding ceremonies and played music and did the amplification for those. I also would perform as the master of ceremonies for the receptions afterwards. Some weddings I did everything. Other weddings I would do just the ceremony. Other weddings I would do just the reception. So as far as my history goes, I've been studying climate change since I was in high school. So that was, over 40 years ago when I started that. At the time, there were still, in fact, there were still not too long before I learned about climate change, there were still scientists who were concerned about a deep freeze, going back into glacial times. But that very quickly reversed. And I got excited in the late 80s because I was kind of hoping that James Hansen and the congressional testimonies that he prepared would take care of, have some action or some kind of program to reverse or change or whatever climate change. And it was probably around, I'd say about 2008, I learned that climate change was irreversible. We can slow it down, and that was the absolute best that can happen. And of course, we were nowhere near doing any of that either. In 2009, right around the same time, probably late 2009, early 2010, about the same time that Steve saw a collapse, I did too. And the that had the same effect on me that it did on him. At the time, I was really busy with weddings, but I still paid attention to everything. And then in 2013, I came upon a term, or well, actually, it was an acronym, NTHE. And I had no idea, I knew what LOL and LMAO and all these other acronyms were, but I'd never seen that one. So, of course, I Googled it to find out what it was. And it's like near term human extinction. What? And I was like, oh, that can't possibly be true. This is, I spent 3 months trying to disprove it. And I very quickly learned that pretty much the opposite was actually the truth, that there was absolutely nothing that stated that it wasn't possible, and actually we were on track to to actually accomplish that feat, unfortunately. And over the years, I've continued learning other things like the maximum power principle, that industrial civilization is bound to collapse. It's unsustainable. It can't stay going. So I'm constantly changing my mind in terms of the evolution of all of this, and I'm kind of coming to new conclusions constantly, and I'm sure that is reflected in my writings. Um, Recently, I had gotten criticism from a couple of different folks about what specifically technology is, because technology is more than just computer devices or electronic screens and cars and electricity generation and so forth. It's also language, the language that we use. It's also reflected in our culture. So there's a whole mix of things that interact with each other to produce what I call technology use. And that is what is increasing overshoot. And overshoot is the main predicament that's causing all the symptom predicaments of climate change and energy and resource decline, pollution loading, and so forth and so on. So there's a lot of them, a ton of them that most people don't even pay attention to, or even some of them don't even know it exists, you
Yeah.
know. And as a result, I think a lot of people are missing out. So much talk of climate change and emissions reductions that they're completely ignoring what's actually causing all of that. And without reducing overshoot, we're never going to be able to reduce emissions anyway.
Right.
So that's, I got pretty passionate about that, and my blog actually is fairly new. It got started well, almost 2.5 years ago, and since then I've written over 100 articles, and I never expected to do that. That it just sort of happened. But just like Steve, uh, my writing sort of is it's like a form of commiseration, I suppose. And just like him, it helps me to kind of understand where we are a little bit better. And I've got a lot. I try not to focus too much on timelines, only from the perspective of we don't really know when extinction's going to happen. We don't really know uh, what the actual day that civilization will collapse. We just know that it's going to, you
Yeah.
know. And I think it's important for people to keep that in mind and to focus on simply living today, living now. Do the things you want to do. Don't put them off just because, oh well, I've my job, and don't put stuff off because of that. That's silly. you should be happy and do as much as you possibly can right now, right today, you know.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, no,
that's what
yeah,
I focus on.
yeah, that's great. Your blog is problems, predicaments, and technology. And I've audio recorded, I think, 24, maybe more, of some of my favorite posts as of like a year and a half ago. I haven't actually recorded hardly anything in the last year and a half just because I've shifted from doing a lot of that. But anybody watching or listening to this, I highly, highly recommend. I mean, there's actually nobody that I recommend more highly than your work, your writings on problems, predicaments, and technology, Erik. And you've got a sort of an index, or you've got a way to, like, if somebody comes to your blog and like is overwhelmed by, oh my gosh, over 100 things, how do I choose whatever, how would you say, what would you advise for somebody to prioritize?
Well, obviously, start out at the first article, which was it's just titled "Problems, Predicaments, and Technology," and it highlights the difference between problems, which have solutions, and predicaments, which have outcomes. You know, so many people are constantly focused on finding solutions for things like climate change or overshoot or energy and resource decline. There are no solutions. Okay, there's none. There is an outcome, and it doesn't matter what we do from this point forward. You can do any number of things, but there's still going to be a negative outcome, regardless. And
Yes.
we have to prepare ourselves for that. And that's kind of what my blog is about: is getting people to realize, hey, look, um, things are not going to be, this shiny technological future that people talk about, like artificial intelligence or any of that other stuff. It's that's just temporary. That might happen, yes, but what comes after that is not going to be pretty. It's not going to be fun, and that's another reason why I kind of focus on the whole, live today, live now.
Yeah,
But
live and love now is the way you used to phrase it. You've shortened it to live now, but I always include the love when I talk about it.
right,
You,
well, love's a very important feature of it, and I do have that in my blog too. If somebody goes there for the first time, look at the table of contents. Go to that. Check out. You can kind of tell what each article focuses on by the title. Every once in a while, I have trouble coming up with a title. You know, there's so many different aspects within the article that it's hard to, so I come up with some generic thing or whatever. But the bottom line is, it's, I always find one of the things that the article focuses on more than other things, and I use that for the title.
yeah,
At the same point in time, there is also a little section, a page. It's a page, and it kind of has it's older, so it only contains probably the first 75 articles or so. Some of the articles are just things that really everybody will learn it over time. Once, like chemtrails, for instance, that I kind of consider that one of the. It was nothing more than an irritation where I kept coming on people that buy into this story that planes are spraying chemicals and so forth. And I mean, anybody that's actually researched that knows that's nothing more than a bunch of hogwash. Um, but there, it's necessary for people to understand what the real reasons that all of this is happening are, and that's what, I just simply wrote it for the common person. In fact, I realize a lot of people can't even get into the actual terminology that I write with. You know, I talk a lot about CO2 and methane and other greenhouse gases. I go into like SF6, which is a really powerful. It's an electrical insulator that they use for switch gear and so forth. But it's like 3,000 times what CO2 is, and so a lot of people aren't going to have any clue what that kind of stuff is.
right.
I try to keep it. I don't want to get too technical because I want to try to keep it for the average person to be able to understand what I'm saying. But at the same point in time, every once in a while you have to explain things a little more definitively. The very first article about technology, I explained technology very simply, and some people have criticized that. So I've over the last several articles, I've gone into explaining technology a little more definitively as ideas and like our language and things that most people probably would not think of as being technology. It's not just electronics and screens and electricity generation and cars and so forth. There's a lot more that goes into technology. I've explained in my blog about the technology of agriculture quite extensively, but I haven't gone into other things like language, money, government, and so forth and so on. So yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot more to unpack there.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you shared all that. And one of the things that you do that I do is I always have the newcomer in mind. And one of the things I like about your blog posts is that the vast majority of them are linked to other things you've written and other things on your site. So somebody can jump in on whatever they're interested in. Excuse me. And simply by following the links of that particular article, that particular post, can actually find a lot of other really great stuff related to it. So yeah, I do that as well. So Steve, how do you say a little bit about your writing, where somebody can find it, and then what you're particularly passionate about in terms of your writing, say in the last year or two?
So I publish on Medium, just under today's contemplation, collapse cometh. It was meant just to be, my brain is always working, always thinking about this stuff. I interpret almost everything nowadays through this ecological overshoot, collapse, worldview, schema, whatever you want to call it. And often I'm just out in my extensive food gardens. As soon as I started on this journey, I thought, okay, well, what do I have control over? Because in actuality, there's not much. But one of the things I can do to help make my family, I suppose, a little bit more self-sufficient, self-reliant, is we could start to grow our own food. So I've turned our backyard, we're on a basement walkout, so we're on a hill, and I've terraced it all, and I've turned that into extensive food gardens, and I spend 8 to 10 hours a day out there toiling away at stuff, and I'm always thinking about our predicament. And I've always got my phone with me because I'm listening to my music, and when I have one of these ideas, I send myself a text with the idea, and I may write about that excuse me, when I go inside, or a lot of the time as well, I find conversations with others on some of these Facebook groups. Probably the most common one Erik and I are both on, called Peak Oil. Constantly interacting with other people, and it just motivates me to think more about my own stuff, or to respond to what they are thinking. As a former educator, one of the key things in trying to teach or educate people is trying to clear up misunderstandings. And so I suppose part of it is trying to clear up misunderstandings about our predicament. So I've been doing that, as Erik says, every couple of days, depending on what I'm up to, how busy I am with the billion other things I'm doing. I may find something that motivates me to write right away. And I just throw that out there for people to think about. I do have a few longer ones. And I think if someone were to look at it and compare it to my educational background, especially in psychology and archaeology, anthropology, I tend to write on those things that I know, I won't say a great deal about, but I know a bit about. I did spend the better part of, as I said, the 80s studying this stuff, and I've really gotten back into it. I got back into the psychology a couple of years ago when my youngest was taking psychology at York University, and it was all online because it was during the pandemic. She was missing that in-person dialogue about the subjects, and I said, well, I'll read along with you, and we can chat about it. And so I did that. I read a couple of psychology textbooks, which got me right back into, what I had studied decades ago. And so that's what I tend to write about. And those things Erik said about government, that comes basically from my archaeology background, but also experiences I've had over the last couple of decades, actually, because when I was in education, I was highly involved with the teachers union on a political side. And then when I went into administration, I was involved with our Ontario Principals Council, which is also on the political side. So I had a lot of interaction with politicians, as it were. How shall I put this so I don't sound overly negative? It was a waste of time. Yeah. It was a waste of time to try and interact with these people who had their own agendas, and basically all of the consultations, deputations, letters, it's all just political theater as far as I'm concerned, to make people feel that they have agency in the socio-political realm in order to keep the masses compliant, complicit, whatever you have. And it's just been reinforced by my experience and my education.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, it's interesting. People watching or listening to this are mostly going to be familiar with sort of where I'm coming from, but I just want to voice just a piece of it here related to both of you. Because from 2000 to 2012, actually December 2012, I was pretty much a techno optimist. I believed from the caves to now to the stars sort of worldview. And in December 2012, I encountered David Roberts' TEDx talk, Climate Change is Simple. The remix, guy by the name of Ryan Cooper added some music, and it was just kick ass. It totally changed my life. So that's when I discovered Michael Rupert and, all these other people writing about collapse, not just climate change, but abrupt climate change. And then in January of 2015 is when I realized, by reading William Catton's Overshoot, which is the most important book I've ever read, that we are dealing with a predicament, and it's not a problem and it can't be solved. And so then the last 4 or 5 years, I've really focused on this post-doom, what I'm calling post-doom, no gloom, which is, you can't get to post-doom without going through a little doom. I mean, if you haven't had the experience of, oh, we're fucked, then you're not really post-doom. You're still in denial or whatever. But then how do you stay heartful? How do you stay generous? How do you stay engaged? Understanding the kinds of insanity that an ecological interpretation of history, and that's what I found so helpful about Catton and many others, is an ecological understanding of history and the rise and fall of civilizations, has allowed me to be to the place where I actually don't look at the news a whole lot. I scan the headlines of the major news on the left and the right, never click on anything. Climateandeconomy.com is the only thing I check daily, religiously, climateandeconomy.com, because it gives you a snapshot, global snapshot, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, climate, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, economy. He takes Sunday off, and I get like 30 to 40 sort of little snapshots of one paragraph and a picture and a title. And that gives me the news that I'm interested in, which is our relationship to the planet and to the future and collapse. And that the kinds of things that most people, that the media have a vested interest in not reporting, and most people psychologically don't want to fucking deal with as long as possible. And so my world now is really for people who genuinely no longer can go back to believing in Santa Claus. They no longer believe that technology is going to save our ass, that the technology in the market, human ingenuity is our way into the future. I call that the fallacy that the poison is the cure. The poison is the cure fallacy. This idea that, the main things that have caused our predicament, that are causing ecocide, that are causing collapse. And I've really been focusing in recent years on not just collapse as something that will occur, might occur, that we have to be concerned about, but the collapse of the biosphere is 250 to 500 years in the making. We're well into it. The collapse of industrial civilization, we're decades into. So focusing on that sort of larger historical perspective, that collapse is already underway. It truly is unstoppable. Most aspects of it are out of our control. And so then once we sort of move through the anger, bargaining, fear, depression, anxiety, blame, and all that shit that most of us normally have to go through, how do we then support each other in living lives that are full of grace and generosity and compassion and, courageous involvement in our communities? But we're not so much, at least in my experience, we're not so much frustrated by people who don't get it, because we know that in every previous collapsed civilization, most people don't get it. So it's like, okay, it's right on schedule. This is what happens, But then how do we just really support each other in living fully and loving the lives we live and being the biggest blessing that we can be to others, including other species? I mean, as Erik makes the point, I think very accurately, at some large collective level, we don't have control over which species are going to exist 100 or 1,000 years from now. But my wife is, doing this assisted migration. She's increasing the odds of some species of trees possibly going into the future by moving their seeds hundreds of miles and supporting others who are moving their seeds hundreds of miles. And it's just great work. Who knows whether it's successful or not, but it's work that wakes her up each day. She's one of the main point people in North America in terms of assisted migration. In fact, the Wikipedia page, assisted migration of forests in North America, she's pretty much created that. So at any rate, how to do all that and then connect with other colleagues who are about this, who get collapse, who get overshoot, and that our fundamental predicament is ecological overshoot. It's not climate change. Who get that the poison can't be the cure, that what got us in this mess is not going to get us out, and who get that most people aren't going to get that most people are going to stay in denial. And so how do we be with that inevitability, as well as the inevitability of collapse, the inevitability of the consequences, the outcomes of overshoot, and then live as fully as we can and as meaningfully as we can, and recognizing that if you only evangelize or prophesy the doom side of reality, you're going to get shunned. And so how do we be with all that? So anyway, so all of that is to simply say that's why. Oh, and because the way that you cited your blog, Steve, on Medium, it's almost sounded like you said collapse comet. Well, it's collapse cometh. Anybody listening to this, it's COMETH. And yeah, you both of you write from this big picture, collapse accepting, ecological overshoot is the issue. What got us in this mess isn't going to get us out. And so what I want to open up, especially to you, Steve, because I've got another post-doom. In fact, anybody watching or listening to this, if you haven't watched my previous post-doom conversation with Erik, I encourage you to do so, and certainly read his blog. But Steve, I want to invite you to share anything you want to in terms of your trajectory. You shared already some of it, but how did you come to your current worldview? And then say something about like what it is that you're writing about, say in the last 6 months or a year or two, that you think is most important. Like if somebody were to turn off this watching this, say 5 minutes from now, what would you say in the next 5 minutes that would be like, yeah, I want to make sure that you get this?
That's tough, picking a best of, and Erik can attest to this. We're in the middle of, or just started a writing project that brings together a number of writers, some of whom you've interviewed, a compilation, if you will, of the best of that I'm working on and hope to get out in another month or two.
Wow, make sure I'm apprised of that, because I send something. I have 2 email lists. One of them just the post-doom no gloom list, which is less than 1,500 people, but I've got a huge, like 36,000 people email list that twice a year I send something to. And that sounds like something I'd want to let the larger list know about. So make sure I know about that.
Well, let me just sneak this in, because I was actually going to ask you to be involved at some point and perhaps doing an afterword, because it kind of will fit into the post-doom an afterword would. So there, I've got it in the public space that I'm asking you. Anyways, oh God, it has been a journey. There's a meme that I saw some time ago that it's a music, what's it called, a metronome, that shows this swinging back and forth between we're so fucked, a better world is possible. It says me every single day. And I'm not sure if it's every single day, but certainly I do waffle between that hope bargaining, if you will, and we're so screwed. I think I sometimes go into that hope stage because I do have 2 young adult children.
Exactly.
And yeah, and so, and I also, that aligns with Erik's live now. My spouse has a mantra that is choose joy. She's even got that tattooed on her arm. That, you know, it's how we frame things. Um, but we tend to be the opposite of each other.
Steve, I just want to jump in real quick just because I'll forget it otherwise. I'm doing a sermon for the Unitarian Universalist Church of Flint, Michigan in another month and a half. And the title that I gave them was From Doom to Joy.
Yeah. Yeah. So we tend to, she tends to be the optimist. I tend to be the pessimist, and hopefully for our children's sake, we kind of balance each other out. And I'm trying to move more towards that choose joy, living in the moment, mindfulness, you know, whatever you want to call it. I get a lot of looking for something that I'm passionate about. It would be working out in my gardens and trying to enjoy. One of my favorite things is when the family sits down together for a meal. It doesn't happen very often anymore, but when we're all sitting down for a dinner meal, that brings me great joy. From a kind of personal, selfish perspective, my one social interaction with people outside of the family would be I play hockey down in the local town, and during the winter I do that 3 times a year. Summer hockey I'm doing once a week, or I shouldn't say 3 times a year, 3 times a week. I do it in the winter, once a week during the summer. So I'm still playing hockey, interacting with some of the local guys. Although I don't go out to the bar and that with them afterwards, because I gave up drinking about 15 years ago, and it's still a struggle at times if I'm hanging out in the bar too much.
I can relate. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I can't go into the bar. I mean, I can't go into the bars, but I don't drink anymore.
Yeah, well, that was one of the main reasons I stopped playing slow pitch baseball, because there was always a case or two in somebody's trunk after a game. And it's like, oh, I just can't do this. But anyways, and the other one is working on my food gardens, and trying to. I figure, you know, at 62 going to 63, I maybe got another half a dozen or more years of this heavy labor left in me.
If any of us do, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm trying to get that, although we have started talking about moving, because the town has a proposal before it to put a commercial development across the street from us. And we've looked out on a lovely greenery for the last 30 years. And there's a developer that has bought the land and wants to put a 50-car parking spot in a commercial building with a restaurant and things like that. And of course, I've spoken out against that. But like I said, we're led by sociopaths who are doing the exact opposite of what we need to be doing. They are doubling, tripling down on chasing what I call the perpetual growth chalice. And rather than trying to even understand what degrowth is, not that I think degrowth is necessarily a solution, because it's not, it might help mitigate things slightly. We're doing the exact opposite. And it's especially true here in Ontario, where we live. It's called the Green Belt on the Oak Ridges Moraine, because of the glaciers that were here. And our provincial government has just opened up that to residential development, because they want to build 1 million homes over the next few years, because Canada has a goal of bringing in 500 million people every year for the next while, because ecological overshoot doesn't exist. So let's just grow. And these are the things I kind of speak out against. As I was saying, you know, as an educator, you want to clear up misunderstandings. So my writing over the last year and a half or so focuses on those kind of things, because I get back to my archaeology again, and I take an even bigger step back in trying to understand these things. So we're going, you know, 10, 15,000 years back to the start of agriculture and first complex societies. That's when we got on the path to screwing ourselves.
I
when we
agree.
first, yeah, when we first started those complex societies. And there are two basic theories about how governments, if you will, or the ruling caste or the rulers, came into being from an archaeological perspective, sociological perspective. Uh, One is the conflict theory, where basically the ruling elite established governments, ruling caste to protect the ruling elite, as opposed and extracting their wealth and everything from the masses. And then there's the integration theory, which is more or less these people took on an organizational role that was needed. And it was, I mean, organizational role was needed to redistribute the surpluses in society. And the accolades and the rewards they get are basically their due, because they're taking on this role for the benefit of society at large. Now, which one of those theories do you think our ruling caste or ruling elite pushes? You know, the latter one. They're doing it for the benefit of everyone. Where you get people on the other side of the road saying, no, just a minute, you know, it's these people are doing it for their own benefit. And one of the things I've come to better understand and believe, and it's my belief, one of the things I also talk about is narrative control in what we believe, and we tend to believe what we want to believe. So one of the things I believe, and again, here I've lost my train of thought, is that we have governments in place to protect the ruling caste of society who have one primary goal, and that is to control or expand the wealth generating or wealth extracting systems that provide their revenue streams and thus their positions of power and prestige and wealth.
Exactly.
And that is kind of the overriding goal of the leaders of the world, like leaders, as if they were actually elected. I don't believe we live in a representative democracy or a democracy or anything like that. That's all the theater that goes on in trying to keep the masses from revolting. But that narrative control, you know, what the ruling caste is doing. And then another big thing that Erik and I have both kind of addressed is the whole idea of renewable energy, or what I like to call, I'm trying to remember who it was that I got this from. It might have been Tim Morgan, but non-renewable, renewable energy harvesting technologies. They're not truly renewable. Although
probably Tim Watkins.
Yeah, rebuildable up to a point.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. But you see all the bargaining that goes on around that when you say, oh, well, we'll just recycle everything, not understanding the energy and resource outputs that are necessary in recycling. And I, like you, was very much a techno optimist growing up as well. I mean, my dad got me into watching Star Trek in the 60s. And we watched it for years, and still watching. I'm still watching all the Star Trek runoffs, you know, Strange New Worlds, Discovery, all of those. And I love Star Wars, and I love those movies. But there came a point, and I don't remember it exactly, where it's like, this just isn't adding up. This is not making sense whatsoever. And it was probably watching Michael Rupert's Collapse when I started really getting into looking into the claims he was making around oil and the economic system, and just how much we were being lied to about everything. And you know, you get to that point where you go, what can you do? What the hell can you really do? Because there's so much that we have no control over, no agency over. What have I got agency over? Well, I've got agency perhaps over myself, right? And I say perhaps because a lot of what we do and we think has a physiological, biological basis that you can't control. I'm just getting to understand what Michael referred to before as, or Erik, I'm sorry, Erik, referred to as a maximum power principle. And that evolutionary drive to maximize whatever power is out there, and we'll just keep, looking for it, trying to develop it, to increase our evolutionary fitness, if you are not realizing that we're on a dead end trajectory.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. Well, I want to ask both of you. So I'll ask Erik you first, but I'd love both of you to respond to both aspects of this question. One is that what have been both of you have mentioned Michael Rupert's, collapse and that sort of thing. But who have been and what has been the most significant influences on you, say in the last decade or so? So that's one question. Like who have been the authors, the movies, the documentaries, the people, whatever, blogs? Like what's been your food? What has sourced your current mind and heart and that sort of thing, your worldview? And then the second question, which is quite different. So maybe actually each of you take time with the first question, and then we'll come back. The second question is, what helps you on a day-by-day basis to wake up? I mean, obviously, Steve, you've mentioned your garden, and I get it, and your family. But what is it that helps you wake up on a daily basis and live week to week without just, pulling the, covers over your head and being in despair or depression or whatever? So let's take those one at a time, because some people have spiritual practices, or they have exercises, or they just have habits. They have habits on a daily or weekly, monthly basis that helps them be in a mostly positive or mostly heartful or mostly engaged from a generous, compassionate way. And those differ. And so I want to make sure anybody watching or listening to this has some sense for each of us of what's been significantly formative in terms of our thinking and our worldview. And then what is it that each of us relies upon or grounds ourselves in, or that we make use of or access of, that helps us on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis. So Erik, why don't you jump in first on that first part? What have been the influences or the things that have shaped your worldview? And then Steve, why don't you take that one too, and then we'll come back to the second part.
Well, obviously for me, just like Steve, my wake up moment came with Michael Rupert's collapse. But I would say probably just like you, Michael, William Catton Jr., and so many of the other ecological writers actually formed, you know, once you read that, your whole mindset changes, and you start realizing that all how everybody else looks at things, this obsession with solving problems, that's a cultural thing. And if you really look at it seriously, you start to realize that we've been solving all these problems all along for thousands, even hundreds of thousands of years. And every time we solved a problem, guess what we created in the process? Wow, big nasty predicament. And so it's sort of like, look, maybe we're looking at this from the wrong perspective. Maybe we should start understanding what we can solve, what's an actual problem, and what is a predicament. It's beyond our control. Anything that we do will not solve it.
Yeah.
And start realizing that our time on this planet is precious. Nobody is guaranteed tomorrow. So we need to focus on right here, right now. And by doing that, one of my main things, how I deal with it, I have down days too. I mean, when you look at the news and you start seeing, all of us, we see collapse everywhere. I mean,
Right.
it's all around us. Restaurants closing, retail shops closing down, storefronts becoming vacant. Now, and that's just the economics of it. There's a lot of other things too, like people aren't able to. They don't have as much disposable income anymore because we're all we have to spend more on all our utilities. We have to spend more on gas for our vehicles. We have to spend more on food. and so forth and so on. And it leaves a lot less to do fun things, and a lot of people have this idea that we're gonna get through the pandemic and get back to normal. And it's like, we're not going
Failing to realize that normal is what got us into this mess
That's
in the
right.
first place.
That's right.
It's like,
So,
what's the cause of our predicament? Solutions from previous problems.
exactly.
Oh,
So,
one other thing I just want to jump in, and I apologize, but I just want to mention, yeah, for me too, the world almost divides into those who have read, understood, and really had their worldview shaped by William Catton's book Overshoot, The Ecological Basis of Revolutionary Change, and those who haven't. Because I've found that those who haven't read Catton or really taken on that understanding, which is the fundamental ecological paradigm, almost to a person, it's almost impossible to not have unrealistic visions of the future, unrealistic visions of what's possible, and a deficient or deformed way of understanding where we are and how we got here. So that's why that sort of the world divides for me into this line of those who read Catton and really get it, and those that haven't. But anyway, continue.
so, and of course, I've actually written about most of these writers. I've included their books. Another one, a huge one that really changed my way of looking at life was Joseph Tainer, The Collapse of Complex Societies, and Jared Diamond, Peter Turchin. These are folks that once you look at that whole scenario, and I also combine it frequently with the astrobiologist or astrophysicist Adam Frank. And once you start seeing this is who we are as a species, we employ the maximum power principle. So the reason we're addicted to technology is because that leverages more energy. We're able to get work done with less effort. We're able to do things more efficiently. But in the end, that actually causes the very predicaments that we're in. And so that we're never really going to be free of that. That's who we are as a species. And so for people to think, oh well, all we have to do is degrow and all this stuff, those are nice thoughts. They're noble, but at the end of the day, there's too many other people who are going to continue on BAU without a clue or without a thought to anything else, because like Steve said, that's their livelihood. They're not going to stop doing that just because we're contributing to overshoot. They don't care. I mean, so um and how I deal with it,
Well, hang
obviously
on a
writing.
second. Before you get to that question, I want Steve to answer the question in terms of what have been the fundamental or some of the more important things that have informed where he is now. Um, and then we'll get to sort of how do you deal with it and what you find helpful in terms of coping and that sort of thing. Steve.
Sure. Thanks. So, I mean, some of the books have already been mentioned. Having a background in archaeology and having it come out just as from my master's and going into education, I never saw it in 1988 was Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies. So as I was traveling down the rabbit's hole of peak oil after watching Rupert's collapse, it was one of the things that popped up on my radar to read. It wasn't until later, and I don't remember exactly when, that I read Catton and Overshoot, but certainly I did. But there were, Richard Heinberg's The End of Growth.
Yep.
Read. What else? I'm just looking at my notes here.
Have either one of you read much of John Michael Greer? Because I've really valued a lot of his stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think I've audio recorded 9 of his books. With his permission, of course. But yeah.
Early on, read James Howard Kunstler.
Yep. Oh, by the way, just I want to mention this just in case anybody's watching this. So we're recording this on the 24th, and this coming Wednesday, Jim Kunstler is going to be interviewing me for his Kunstlercast podcast. So that's going to be fun. I interviewed him a few years ago, but now he's going to be interviewing me on sort of the post Doom No Gloom world.
Oh, great.
Cool.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed his writing style. I mean, he came out and cut right to the chase a lot of times. Alice Friedman,
Yeah.
uh,
Yep.
you know, Gail Tverberg.
Yep.
Like I said, you've interviewed a number of these people. Um, and that's, and there's a whole bunch.
Yeah.
And I'm still the journey's there. I spent 25 years in education, but I consider myself to be a student every day.
Exactly.
So those are the kind of authors that I read.
Yeah, that's great, Steve. And so why don't you transition into sort of, I can't use the word transition anymore because it's got a different meaning for certain populations, but sort of just slide into what it is that allows you or supports you and your family, but especially you in terms of on a day by day, week by week basis.
Sure. My family might be surprised for me to say this, but they are the ones that drive me. They also tend to interpret my behavior somewhat differently than I intend at times. But I had this conversation with my wife and my children.
How old are your daughters again?
Uh, Sabrina just turned 26. Sam is coming up on 28. Yeah, and they're both still at home. Um, Sam, they're living downstairs. They've got our basement. We kind of converted into a self-contained apartment. And then Sabrina, my youngest, is just going into her last year of teachers college. She's been in college, graduated, worked for a while, went back to university. And so she's at 26, just about to graduate, which is actually quite a bit younger than both my wife and I when we graduated. But anyways, getting back, what gets me out? They do, for the simple reason that my wife and I are different in the sense of who they go to for particular things. I will admit freely that I am not the emotional support person in the family. That is not my strength. I admit it, never has been. I am the, as it were, physical or practical support person. So I get up in the morning, put the coffee on. I have for, I'm going to say 15, 20 years. I have delivered a cup of coffee to my wife every morning pretty well. Make sure she has her morning coffee. She's been retired the last couple of years, and I still do that every morning. So she stays in bed with the dog, and she enjoys her coffee. I make sure the cars are filled with gas. I make sure they're backed in, so who's ever going out, I do all those practical things.
Yeah, got
That's me. Yeah, if they want something done, come to me. If they want some emotional support, they go to my wife.
Exactly.
It's unfortunately just not me. So I recognize that, and I make sure all those things are in place for everybody for the day. And that drives me a lot of the time, making sure I can support my family in the way that I am capable of doing. And then
yeah,
of course,
that and your garden and your writing, that's a trifecta that I think would be profoundly nourishing.
Yeah, well, that's my day. And I've been retired 10 years, and that's my routine. I enjoy it. And here we are. I want to sneak one thing in. One of the things we've been kind of bouncing around that I think is huge in all of this, and why we can't set things right, whatever right is, everybody's got their different opinions on that, is perhaps one of the most significant cognitive shifts in human evolution was our denial of reality. Yep. And that everybody is stuck in that. And the ruling elite are leveraging that like you wouldn't believe to keep their game going. And everybody's just in denial.
Maybe you and I and Rob Malkarski can schedule a conversation on that topic, because as much as I love and respect and admire and value so much of what he's written on his Undenial website, and I've read Varkey and Brower and that sort of thing, but I have a different take on what grounds that sort of universal, at least in among civilized people, a universal denial of reality. So that's too juicy and interesting to go down that rabbit hole with you now here, but I'd welcome doing that.
Sure.
Cool. All right, great. Thank you. And I do want to mention one thing that I'll just tie into, because I actually do have, I'm sort of more emotionally available in our marriage and in our spheres. So I do that fairly well. Connie actually is much more gifted in terms of the practical and the detail. But one thing I can relate to is that I usually, like not this morning, she woke up before me this morning, but usually I wake up before her. And then when I hear her awake, I go in and I massage her feet. That's sort of our ritual. And then I bring coffee and then we read, and then I read aloud climateandeconomy.com. And so those three things, massaging her feet, getting her coffee, and then sharing Climate and Economy and discussing that's one of our little morning rituals.
See, I don't discuss this stuff with my wife. I learned long ago that it was not in my best interest to do so.
I applaud that fully, brother. Yeah. Erik, so what wakes you up, or what supports you on a daily or weekly basis in doing the work you do and staying in a place of mostly, I don't even know what word to use, but mostly positive and I don't want to say hopeful, because hope is a bad word. It's a 4-letter word for me. But in terms of inspired to do what you do and to live your life with as much love and what I call love in action, which is different than desperate, fearful activism, but where love motivates you to be in action. Like, what supports you in doing that?
Well, probably one of the biggest things. I run the Prepping for NTHE group, and
On Facebook.
Right. And so I often see a lot of different things that people mention in there, including stuff that you post. And like Steve mentioned, the Peak Oil group. I don't spend a lot of time in the degrowth movement groups, simply because there's really, once in a while I find something in there that I think I can provide a little bit of help on. But more often than not, there's too much hopium being spewed in there. It's really, it's not as much, it's not as beneficial as my group. And then the Methane News Group. So I donate my time and volunteer for that, running those two groups. And then I've still got a project ongoing. I got all the electrical work on my project out back approved earlier this year. And the deck, I finished that last October, so that's all good to go. The roof above the deck was finished in December. Believe it or not, we still had good weather until the very first week of December. And then with our first snowfall came a litany of other weather that wasn't very good. And so I pretty much closed up shop until May of this year.
Where are you again?
Pardon?
Where are you again?
Fort Wayne, Indiana. And then right now I'm busy painting the actual concrete on the exterior. And I should be finished. I hope to be finished with that project by, September or October of this year. And then, of course, I've got Lexi, our dog, and my family here, which is just pretty much Mel and myself and June. And I talk to my mom, but probably about once a week. But I see her maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks. She doesn't live in Fort Wayne, so I have to go visit. But uh, but outside of that, that's pretty much what
Yeah.
keeps me grounded, along with my reading. Uh, I usually I see many more articles of Steve's than I actually read, but I have read quite a few of them. I can't keep up with all of them all the time because there's so much other stuff to read too. But and Peter Russell, believe it or not, and thank you for recommending me to him, or him to me rather, Michael. Peter Russell just sent me a book, and I hope to get that finished by within the next week or two. It's basically about the predicaments we face,
Forgiving
and
Humanity, I think is the name of it.
right, how there's no real blame, and I agree with that. Really, I mean, how can we blame our own genetics and our own biological imperatives? To me, that just, sure, you can blame the economy. A lot of people blame capitalism. A lot of people blame oil. A lot of people blame the oil companies. People blame governments. People blame all that blame. I wrote an article a long time ago called "Don't Play the Blame Game," because it's a waste of time. I mean, assigning blame doesn't really accomplish anything. It does help to find out, where we went wrong. I think that's beneficial, but obviously you have to keep going back and back and back and back. And you obviously the dawn of agriculture was one of, I call that a stepping stone. That was one of the big ones. When we discovered fossil fuels, that was another big stepping stone. And when we devised computer systems and the World Wide Web, that was another big stepping stone. And we've done it again with artificial intelligence. And anybody that's read anything about it, knows that artificial intelligence isn't really intelligent. It's
It's
just
artificial
picking
stupidity.
up. Exactly. And each one of these steps, what we've actually done, we might have made work easier for us, but in so doing, it's harnessing yet more energy and creating more overshoot as
Exactly.
right. And so it's that's not going to do anything but make everything worse, not better.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let me jump in because I have a conversation with somebody just the other day about artificial intelligence, and I mentioned artificial stupidity because it models the half of our brain that's all about knowing and understanding and controlling, but that's not concerned with relating. And we can know all we want about reality, but if we don't have something in culture and in our psyche to help us relate in right relationship with reality, we're fucked basically. And
Yeah.
so I don't think that artificial intelligence can slow, stop, or reverse what is actually already unstoppable and out of our control. It's a collapse accelerator, perhaps. It's a
Yeah.
collapse and overshoot amplifier for sure.
Exactly.
And if I do have one hope, my own sort of little private piece of hopium, it would be that artificial intelligence, artificial stupidity, whatever, but AI, I hold out at least a little bit of hope that it can help us or take the role itself and do it for us or do it for the body of life, the biosphere, to ensure that we have as few nuclear meltdowns and other geological scale toxicity as possible. I mean, if it could do that, if it could help lessen, we're going to have nuclear meltdowns and we're going to have, toxicity, biological, geological scale toxicity. But if it can help us lessen that at least a little bit, or help us assist some other species in passing through this bottleneck. So some of these species that have tens of millions of years of lineage, if we increase the odds, if artificial intelligence can help increase the odds that some of those might make it into the future, I think that's a good thing. But yeah.
I've kind of given up on all that, but only from the perspective of uh, the whatever happens is going to happen, and I think for me, I know in my mind that I mean, what control do we honestly have over it? And anybody that's looked at the PFAS, I don't know if anybody's familiar with PFAS or PFOS chemical. They're called forever chemicals. It's in our rainwater now, so it's getting into our crops. It's getting into the feed that goes to the animals. And I just posted. If it's not in the most recent article I posted, it'll be in the next one. It's a video about a farmer in Michigan. He was spreading uh, sewage sludge that the city would give him for free. That the agriculture department actually told them to use this stuff to fertilize his crops. Um, but of course, it's contaminated with PFAS. It got into the meat, into the animals that he was slaughtering. The uh, basically one of the organizations, I don't know if it was the FDA or somebody, one of the national organizations that's supposed to keep track of all this, actually found it in his meat, and so they actually took the farm by force
Yeah.
and the meat,
Yeah.
and basically forced him into, I don't know if it's bankruptcy or what the case is going to be. He's actually, the part of it came from an automotive company that was releasing this crap into the waterways. And as a result, all that sewage sludge, of course, had all that toxicity in it that was going into the planting fields, and then that got into the animals, and so he's now sued that company. Yeah, it's just you can, once you see this, you just see all these different predicaments all coming together, and it's sort of like, you know, I would hope that too, that we could somehow decommission all these nuclear power stations. But I also know in my heart, because of denial of reality, just like Steve said,
Yep.
it's not going to happen. We
Yeah. No,
might be
I
able to
I
get a
agree. Yeah.
we might we might be able to get a number of them decommissioned before civilization collapses, but I think there's no way really realistically to get all of them. And well, you know what's going to happen there: ionizing radiation, and just pretty much the same stuff that's happening on a daily basis. I mean, it's just, it's sad, but it's I think another way that I deal with it is trying to look at these things from a different perspective, and seeing them not so much, we have this tendency to look at everything from an anthropomorphic and anthropocentric perspective and viewpoint, and as a result we often completely ignore how all the other animals might be seeing this.
no, exactly.
And if we just try to think about how they view it, just for once, like, how does a fungus look at all of this, or how do bacteria see this, or what about yeast? I mean, honestly, in the grand scheme of things, when you look at it realistically, you can understand that we truly are no smarter than yeast. We know how to multiply, and you get that energy and boom, we're off to the races. you know
I'm so grateful that you brought us back around to, because I think I don't put blame, because blame isn't the right word, but I attribute anthropocentrism, human centeredness, rather than life centeredness, as
Right.
where we thought, the turning point that allowed us to then think that we could dominate the natural world, think that we were masters of creation, we were masters of the living world. And that human centeredness is not only ecocidal, but that allowed human-centered cultures to overtake other cultures as well. And so bringing us back to, I think, one of the spiritual practices, if you want to use that kind of language, is, yeah, shifting to how does another species, how does another being, trees, fungus, bacteria, Connie's really big into, banana slugs, and squirrels. How do these other creatures see and experience this? And then how can we, with some sense of graciousness, move from our own human-centeredness to having some gratitude and respect and engagement where we can, knowing, I mean, my hope for you, Steve, is that collapse, which we're already in the midst of, it's already in process. I hope it happens fast enough that that development doesn't get built.
Well, you know what? I would agree with you. And that's why I sometimes hope that the gargantuan Ponzi scheme that is our financial, monetary, economic system does collapse soon.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sorry, I'm torn because obviously I'm trapped in it. But on the other hand, it would probably be good for the planet.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, anything, Steve, that you, anything, either one of you, anything you want to stay in completion, because we should, you know, cut this short, but not short, but we've gone close to an hour and a half already. So anything you, either one of you want to say to bring this conversation to completion?
Yeah, two things I was just thinking of. The comments were back and forth there. And hopefully I'll remember them both. Getting back to the denial of reality aspect. I think a big part of that is when I go back and think about my psychology, is the drive for us to reduce anxiety provoking thoughts. I think that's a big part of it. And we've got all these psychological mechanisms at work that want to get rid of those thoughts. If it's a, you know, it's the fight or flight, and how do we reduce this anxiety? And that's kind of where I see the denial of reality coming in. And of course, now that I said that, I can't remember the other one. So I'm going to let Erik jump in, and maybe it'll come back to me.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Well, he's probably talking about cognitive dissonance, which you know,
that's part and parcel of those psychological mechanisms, right? That those anxiety provoking thoughts. I mean, we deny them, we ignore them, we seek to reduce that cognitive dissonance. You know, there are all sorts of things going on that cause us to think poorly, all of us.
Yep.
Right, exactly. So, Erik, any last thoughts?
Live now.
Yeah, live
now. Get out there and live now. That's, I mean, the one thing that I didn't say is, as far as keeping myself in good spirits and to be thankful and grateful for what I do have. You know, who knows when I will die? I mean, bottom line is I'm not guaranteed tomorrow. So there's no point in putting off things that don't have to be put off. If you don't have to put it off, don't get it done. Tackle it right now. And the best thing to do is get out there in nature, do some hiking, or get around some trees, or spend some time in parks. Go to the mountains. Big one for me. I love the mountains. Some people like the beaches. Go visit the ocean. You know, or Lake Michigan for all practical purposes. You know, there's just a whole host of things that people can do to keep themselves feeling better about where we are, and focus on your family and friends. You know, they're there for a reason.
Yeah, amen. Yeah. Well, again, thank you both for having this conversation. Thank you for the work that you do. Steve's work can be found on Medium. Today's Contemplation, Collapse Cometh. And Erik's work can be found in a number of places, but certainly Problems, Predicaments, and Technology at Blogspot, as I recall. And my work, all the important work related to this conversation, is at postdoom.com. There's really three. There's the 90 conversations that I've had that this one will be added to. There's the resources that I have, which is just a, you know, it's a, you know, a person could spend the rest of their life just exploring the resources and documentaries and blog posts and things that I've created and collated, or what's the word, curated of others. And then also the conversations. I have post-doom conversations. There's a Collapse Acceptance Alliance conversation that's happening that Val Christensen and Peter Melton lead. And there's my most pastoral, that is, I sort of a post-doom, no gloom pastor. My most emotionally supportive stuff can be found at the Connect page, the post-Doom Connect page. So at any rate, thank you both. I will post this probably in the next few days, and just grateful that you're doing what you're doing, and that I get to count you as a collegial friend in this work of trying to educate people and to live with integrity and love, and as much joy as possible. I mean, one of the things that I didn't touch on is that for me, my joy is all about full out acceptance and trust in collapse. So my joy isn't about denying collapse, or I think this is where your wife and I may be in a different place, Steve. But for me, the joy comes from fully accepting my mortality, our mortality, and then living fully in that context. But I do indeed count both of you as colleagues and friends in this work. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Michael.
And Erik,
go on.
Erik, it was great to finally meet you in person, but thank you, Michael, so much for this.
Cool. Great. Erik?
Thank you, Michael. And thank you too, Steve, for all your contributions and all the work that both of you do. I might not get to read everything or see every video or whatnot, but I do get to watch a lot of them. And I certainly deeply appreciate what both of you are doing and contributing to help other people understand.
Yeah. Oh, all right. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.